In 1954, a science fiction film titled The Devil Woman from Mars was being shown on television sets across America. Described by a columnist for Rolling Stone magazine as being a delightfully terrible movie, it was quickly recognized as one of those so bad it's good cult classics. One viewer of this film in 1954 was a young Octavia E. Butler. After seeing such a poorly laid out story at age 12, she decided that she could write better science fiction than what she had just witnessed. As she put it, a year after seeing the film, she was submitting terrible pieces of fiction to innocent magazines. But as readers began to notice her writing, the word terrible would not show up as a descriptor. In fact, Octavia Butler would not only become one of the leading figures of the genre, but find a way to change the whole framework of what had already been established as science fiction. She would also become the first science fiction author to win the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship in 1998. I'm Pavio, and this is Attention, and today we're going to look at how Butler went from a job inspecting potato chips to one of science fiction's most recognizable names. "22 years after Butler had watched a bad sci-fi and decided to write science fiction, she would publish her debut novel. A novel that would become the first in a series titled the Patternmaster series, which would ultimately be the last chronologically. It would not be until 1979 in which Butler would receive a $5,000 advance to write her novel Kindred. This would launch her career as a full-time writer and give more recognition to what would become the Patternist series. In her novel Kindred, Butler had in mind to illustrate a story that would look at the history of African Americans in a way that would provide individualism through defining attributes the characters would express or practice. This stood her apart from many writers of her time that would write visible minorities with tropes preconceived, or with a stapled typecast that did not reflect the reality of America. Octavia Butler's experience in life, particularly growing up, had provided her with a unique window into what one would experience living in a type of dystopian society. Born in 1947, Butler lived in an unfair society experiencing harsh discrimination, which she claimed made her an experienced writer in writing these dystopian novels. Though there are many themes in Kindred, and it can be explored through many different lenses, all equally important and relevant, the central theme takes a look at self-identification and how one's societal environment shapes not only the values that are projected inwardly, but also how one views themselves and their value in society. Through the first-person narration of Adana Franklin, also known as Dana, and her interactions with Rufus, Butler writes these themes in which the reader is able to see how one is conditioned by society with a prevailing inclination toward discrimination. Dana is a symbol of compassion and overwhelming empathy that does not come from having ignorance of the real world, but through an understanding of what it means to be human. These attributes shape an ethics for Dana that make her a strong protagonist that understands clearly the restraints of a relationship that involve a power struggle in which she is constantly having to fight against desired actions to preserve not only her values but her life. Needless to say, this was not your typical science fiction novel when it was released, and to this day still stands as a reminder to the diversity of storytelling in the genre. In fact, the elements of science fiction are more so in the background of the heavy story portrayed. and serves as a device to further perpetuate the substantial themes the book tackles. Butler's Patternist series, chronologically, begins with her novel Wild Seed, which was the fourth novel to be published in the series in 1980. The novel Patternmaster would be the last book chronologically, but published first in 1976. However, each novel can be read on their own as individual stories. Presenting an array of characters throughout, Octavia proceeds with elaborate scenes and brilliant prose that make the complex narrative extraordinarily smooth and plain to follow. I won't get into this series right now, as I do plan on making a video on this separately, as it delves into some deep philosophical dilemmas, all the way from the mind-body dualism to the ethics of selective breeding. After the publication of Kindred and the continued publications of the Patternist series, Octavia E. Butler would become a household name in not only science fiction circles, but in circles that would typically look at the genre sci-fi as being lowbrow and or juvenile. Butler was introducing modern politics to a future not yet understanding the past. This is another common reading of the Patternist novels, and a reason why many have considered Butler to be the mother of Afrofuturism, a cultural aesthetic that envisions a future where African refinement converges with technological advancements. In 1995, Butler would publish a short story collection titled Bloodchild. The titled story Bloodchild was originally published in 1984 in Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine, and in the same year would win the Nebula Award for Best Novelette. And the following year, in 1985, the story would go on to win the Hugo Award for Best Novelette. Now, in 1993, Butler would publish a novel that would bring her back to the center of science fiction twice. This novel would be the first in a two-novel series titled The Parable of the Sower. This novel would win the New York Times Notable Book of the Year in 1994 and be nominated for the Nebula Award for Best Novel in 1995. This series primarily takes place throughout the 1920s, where climate change has sent communities into poverty due to drought, making fresh water a very valuable commodity. Fires spread as common as rainfall, and not only are public schools being privatized, but communities follow suit. A growing concern and lack of trust with policing and its overreach of power run throughout. And a presidential candidate promises to restore the economy and break down government programs, and ends a rally stating, "Leave your sinful past behind and become one of us. Help us make America great again." And though these slogans did not originate with Butler, but were used in the 1980 Reagan and Bush campaign, with all the predictions made in the series, it is difficult to believe that Butler wrote these novels without the help of a time machine. Because of its accuracy in predicting the future, it is no wonder that 17 years later, in 2020, the novel saw a resurgence in sales and shot to the New York Times bestsellers list. This actually would be the first time one of Butler's novels made the New York Times bestsellers list, which is, of course, a major accomplishment in itself. However, for Octavia Butler, it would have been a much more meaningful and personal achievement, as recently published journal entries show that she had written an inspirational note to herself in 1988, where she tells herself that one day she would make the bestsellers list and inspire Black youngsters to broaden their horizons. Unfortunately, in the late February of 2006, she would pass away at age 58, 14 years before seeing this dream of hers come true. However, what she accomplished in her life will certainly not be going anywhere, and will continue to do what it is that she wanted her work to achieve. I hope you liked that short introduction to science fiction author Octavia E. Butler. And next week we'll go a bit deeper into some of the ideas behind her work and further detail why she continues to be a major figure in the genre to this day. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and hope to see you next week.